great questions coming up on the pigeonhole. I've combined a number of them together, especially the top ones. And so I'll ask a question first, and then after the first question, I'll go to Toronto. So the biggest question people are asking, which has been expressed in a few different ways, is about the business model. So as repairable products can reduce future revenues, what are some incentives that we can use to motivate companies to produce more repairable products? And that's quite linked to another question, which is there a conflict between retailers just wanting to sell more and more and the efforts that we have? And one other person brought forward this idea of what do we do in terms of the company's brands and the brand value that they have that's linked there, and reputation and perceived qualities. How do we move companies into this space? So that's the first question, is really about how do we encourage this behavior when the incentives are really about future revenues? Who would like to pick that up? Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, just quickly, you got a big company like Patagonia, who puts, they partner with iFixit, and they have all these videos of how to repair their clothes, their jackets. They're trying to encourage people to do this, and then it brings kind of a brand recognition or brand awareness around it, so people want to buy more Patagonia clothes. They know they last longer. They know they can be repaired. So you can differentiate your product line or your brand by making it fixable. Of course, by not having to produce more items, your costs go down too. But yes, you're looking at your profit margin, and can you make a profit margin on a small piece that can be fixed and repaired and shipped, even locally through 3D printers or something like that, then there probably is a business model there. But the challenge, I think, is that it's a manual task. It's very manual. So if you don't make it easy to repair, it's going to take a long time to repair it, and especially in the Western world where salaries are so high, and that's where you want to avoid having to ship it back and forth where it's originally manufactured. You want to make it easy to repair so it's not too expensive.
Yeah, right. So the costs will go down if you've got more quality goods that sell at a higher price, but you also need to consider the cost of repair if you're putting that into your business model. But there also might be a benefit to people seeing you being connected to the repair and reuse like Patagonia has had. Yeah, other people's perspectives on this. Sheila, go ahead.
Yeah, I think repair, can you hear me?
No, you'll need to use your hand microphone. Yeah, there we go.
Me? Yeah, I think.
Yes, you're on.
Okay,
go ahead.
Repair and reuse are very different things. And I think there is a lot of reuse going on. There's a lot of informal reuse, because I'd say reuse is when the product is still functional, but you no longer want it. So there is a tremendous amount of reuse going on in the consumer marketplace, I think, from handed on from person to person or through nonprofits or eBay sales, that type of thing. There is a lot. The repair is maybe more problematic because we use our devices so much more than we did in the past. They're on all the time. The connectivity does eventually wear out. Then it goes back into the recycling network. And as I said, on the business side, there's a tremendous amount of repair and reuse takes place, because obviously if you have a movie camera that's worth $30,000, something goes wrong, it's economically worth your while and the vendor to repair it for you.
Right, so there is maybe some built-in business model in terms of repair of these larger ticket items.
Larger, more expensive items.
Yeah, great, thanks, Sheila. Tony.
Yeah, I'd say, part of solving these issues is to, think differently. So as an example, for us, our bread and butter is the fact that we are very good at being a thrift retailer, taking basically what I like to call a dog's breakfast, that comes into the back room, and figure out what is good enough to make it to the sales floor and what isn't. And oftentimes, what isn't good enough to make it to the sales floor are really great items that may just have something wrong with them. Very small, but we're not in the business of repair. So when we think about changing or evolving our business model, there could be a day where our business model and Ryan's business model, start to intersect. There may be a day where in Value Village stores, there's a portion of the store set aside where we have items that maybe have those slight imperfections, and a space in our store for people to be able to potentially repair them. And if they want to invest the time to repair that item and then be able to buy that high quality item at a very affordable price because they've invested the time to do that, that's one less item for us that we then have to figure out how we manage the waste stream for that item. So I think as just like consumers are reshaping how traditional retailers are thinking about their business, I think as there's more creativity and more understanding of the impact of being able to try to ensure every single item that we can stays out of the waste stream, I think it'll start to shape business as well.
Yeah, so you could see these kind of reuse enterprise hubs where people could have not only things repaired but tailored right in the same place. Michael, and one of the other questions is about metrics for this. So how are you seeing this in the European Union? Are there metrics around this? Are you seeing this discussion about revenue and financial revenue?
Well, if I could just do a remark about the previous
definitely.
question, metrics on reuse, maybe I can offer some perspective. The revenue is more of a difficult question, but concerning partnerships between social enterprises and retailers and producers, there's more and more we're seeing, certainly on a local and sometimes national scale, these possibilities of partnering with larger retailers in the realms of their corporate social responsibility and what they also want to offer as services to customers. So, for example, in the UK, most IKEA stores, they have a social enterprise with whom they are cooperating with that offer take-back services of old furniture that people are replacing when buying new furniture, and the social enterprises get paid for this service because IKEA wants to offer a service of what to do with your old furniture, and it collaborates with these organizations. So on the one hand, social enterprise gets a new material stream which they can then sell, and on the other hand, there's also this interesting collaboration whereby also there's an opportunity for IKEA to cooperate with organizations which are used to reuse, and also looking at ideas of they themselves of how to try and incorporate some forms of reuse into their activities. There's this idea of remanufacturing as well. It's not an idea of remanufacturing, it is a whole industry of remanufacturing out there as well. And for example, there's an organization in France called Anovo, and they make the set-top boxes, set-top boxes for cable TV and for satellite. So they have a remanufacturing system of this, of like a type of a reverse logistics system. They take the set-top boxes, and there's a social enterprise working with them in terms of the possibility of dismantling, and then they reassemble everything, and then it's sold or leased out as a new product again. In terms of metrics for
well, that's the thing, because if you think about it, that right now we're measuring financial turnover, but what would be the metrics around reuse if we're looking at these new business models?
For us, when we're talking about metrics of reuse, I mentioned there, for example, a target on reuse, which we're promoting. Now, the targets need to be smart. In the case of places like France and Belgium and Spain, where they have targets related to reuse, it's based on simply the tonnage of materials that are sold by thrift stores, for example, social enterprises running thrift stores in particular. But when it comes, so it's easier, I think, a little bit when you're talking about materials such as textiles, furniture, and electronics to try and find some form of metrics to support reuse and to count reuse. When it comes to packaging, and there's lots of discussions at the moment concerning reuse of packaging, that becomes a little bit more, in terms of measuring the reuse rates of packaging and setting targets for packaging, that's a big discussion at the moment, and I'd be interested to see if there's any ideas concerning that.
And of course, Michael, we need to consider if we're measuring tonnage of stuff moving through the repair and reuse, we might not be looking at absolute reductions of materials. So how can we also show the thriving of enterprises, the thriving of jobs as perhaps metrics as well? So let's go to Toronto and hear a question from our Toronto group.
Hello. First off, this is a fantastic panel, and we're really enjoying being with you today. We have a question for Ryan. Ryan, congratulations on all of your fantastic work. We know that you are a real innovator here in our city, and we're always so glad to see you as part of events like this. And our question is around your membership and funding model, and if you find that it is sustainable, if there's grants available, and if you find that you have the resources you need to scale up.
Sure, it's a good question. Revenue is always a challenge in a nonprofit organization, I would say, or any small organization, really. We're 20% dependent on grants right now, but in Canada, as being a nonprofit organization versus being a charitable organization, makes a very big difference in the amount of grants that you can actually apply for. So about 99% of the grants are actually only available to charitable organizations as opposed to nonprofits. So it's a legal difference. We're going for the charitable status, but it takes a while with the CRA to approve such a thing. Actually, environment is not considered one of the main areas that is considered charitable in Canada. So that is, it presents a bit of a challenge for us in that way. We do charge $50 as the membership fee, the starting membership fee. We have upgrades that you can do, so that gives us a little more revenue. We also do workshops, we do youth programs. So we find methods to try and sustain our enterprise, but ultimately rent is a very huge cost for us. And we have 60 plus volunteers, so we're able, because there's a lot of enthusiasm around the project, we can reduce our labor costs in a way, but the rent costs, we can't do anything about it. We have to pay market rent, and it's just an extraordinary expense. So if you know, that's where we're trying to work with the public library system, where they already have locations, and perhaps some of those locations can accommodate a program like ours if they're willing to kind of reshift some of the shelvings of books. You know, more people are going to ebooks. Can there be a room for? Can there be room for projects like us for people to share, and then obviously reduce the rent? Or, as I suggested with the shipping container idea, can we stick those in parking lots? You'd be paying for 5 or 10 parking spaces all year round, but it would be certainly far cheaper than going on a main strip in a dense area and paying market rent there, which is just not an option for us for the most part. So we have to look at the rental costs being very expensive, the salary costs. People get by, but we try to have a competitive salary for the people that are actually doing very skilled work with us. But I think everybody's kind of making a little sort of a sacrifice in order for this business to sustain itself the way it is. And in the long term, it's about finding more grants and reducing and getting more members, of course, and then reducing our rent.
Great, thank you so much, Ryan. And of course, we're thrilled that this tool library and work is happening across Canada, so great. I have some questions for you, Tony, from Value Village, and it has to do with the textiles and recycling of textiles. And I think people are really interested in how unsoiled textiles are they staying local, or are they being shipped overseas? So what is being recycled locally? And linked to that, how do we track these kind of textiles going to foreign markets?
Yeah, so the world of the entire sort of ecosystem of managing textile waste, and in particular reusable textiles, is, in terms of true recycling, it doesn't exist in North America. You'll hear that phrase, and in fact, my title, which is Vice President of Recycling and Reuse, it used to just be Vice President of Recycling. And we did that because we thought that people really didn't understand reuse and they understood recycling, so we would just call it that and they would get it. But in North America, there is a very limited infrastructure and technology established to be able to actually recycle textiles. Cotton, denim, as an example, there's some small opportunities with denim, converted insulation, things like that, but by and large, it's all offshore. So the current ecosystem of managing textile waste here in Europe and other countries is heavily dependent on a very long history and industry that is multinational that's set up to manage that. And the way that looks is reuse is encouraged in every single market, whether it's here or Europe. The majority of the demand for high-quality used clothing are in countries like Africa, and many people are that's a hot topic right now, is used clothing being exported to Africa. But here's the thing: those that do it well, as we do, our product is not actually exported to Africa. Our product that we don't use in our stores ends up being exported to 3 countries: Pakistan, Dubai, and India, where those countries have set up special economic zones that are designed to create jobs and create revenue for their country. And what happens is, in our stores, the product that goes into out of our store, and it's just an industry term, I don't want to get too technical, but it's called a mixed rag. And that just means that that bale has a mixture of all kinds of different reusable clothing in it. It's got a lady's top, a men's top, pair of jeans, all of it. Well, those processors in those countries, they actually separate that bale into individual categories, about 35 different categories of items. And then they rebale those items into single, small 100-pound bales of reusable clothing. And that's what is sold into Africa. And that's our model. So in our model, we ensure, one, that the clothing that is moving on to those secondary markets is reusable clothing. And number 2, the end user, the market in Africa, is getting specific categories of items that are reusable. That's how we do it. But By and large, the rest of the industry that participates in this doesn't work that way. It works through multiple levels of what we call brokers. So for us, we're a little different in that we work with the exact person that's touching our merchandise, and then we also understand the exact distributors that they're selling that merchandise to in Africa or other countries that they're selling it. This is an area of business that doesn't have a lot of regulation. So we're one of the few that actually champions creating standards for that back-end process, because we've spent over a decade sort of building a model that has more transparency in it for us.
Great. Yeah, thanks for telling us about that, Tony. And Sheila, I wanted to ask you about this. One of the examples from overseas is about the Swedish tax for repaired goods, so incentive basically for repairing goods. And, you know, actually it's tax breaks, I should say. And it's creating this incentive market. And there's, you know, a number of questions that are around how do we support repair through government policy? Is something like this in the works here? Or?
I don't think so, and I don't even know if it's needed. I think we need good data before we start, interfering in the tax code and tax systems. They have a national, I believe would be a national tax.
That's right.
A lot of our initiatives are provincial, or even municipal, so it's quite a different thing. I think one thing that we don't do well enough is really understand what's in the waste stream and what is left as waste. If we always tend to go upstream, it's almost impossible as a data gathering exercise to know where everything goes. Yeah. And if we look at electronics, probably we're getting about 5 kilograms per capita in Canada, which is phenomenal. A lot better than in most US states or even European countries when you back out the white goods. Canada does a very good job. Canadians are very committed to recycling. You look at what's going into the landfill, maybe 2 kilograms or a little bit more. We need to work on what those things are and get them out. And then I'm presuming the rest of it is being reused or has a value to people in society. So I think you can add a lot of expense to your economy trying to chase data. But practically, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and is there a real problem?
So yeah, and actually this is going to be our final kind of along the road. So I'll go back to Tony. You know, what is this powerful next step for reuse and repair? And then I'll come to both of you for that as well.
Well, I do think education is a big part of it. And you know, candidly, in our business, we've talked about our business for many, many years around social responsibility and what we do on the front end of our business. But the back end and this reuse message is really resonating with people as they learn more about the impact of their footprint in terms of their buying decisions. To connect with that last question, one thing that may be interesting to think about, and it came up actually at the WEAR conference, where you had this group of apparel retailers and manufacturers there, and I never would have thought this would have been said. But given the landscape of, at least with textiles, the fact that there's really no recycling infrastructure here in North America, there's reuse but not recycling, that the recycling infrastructure exists offshore and it's more robust there. And the reason it's located there is that ultimately that's closer to where new textile manufacturing occurs. And so one of the topics that they talked about was, in order to really make a change in terms of the sustainability of the textiles that we purchase, manufacturers, labels, and brands will need to, on their own, initiate change in terms of incorporating more recycled material into their products. One of the ideas that was talked about was potentially an import tax, and a varying import tax based on the percentage of recycled content in apparel, so that it created sort of this level playing field for apparel brands and retailers to say, okay, right, if I don't want to do it, I have a higher tax. If I want to do it, I don't. And that would encourage investment in the infrastructure needed to allow more of that to happen.
Great, great. How about you, Michael? What's a powerful next step for repair and reuse?
I guess just the two things. The most immediate thing on my mind at the moment, because we're so involved in it, is just really ensuring that reuse and repair is at the very top priority as part of this so-called circular economy package, or this circular economy vision that the European Union is now promoting. But beyond this policy context, I think it's exactly that. I think it's cracking behavioral change is probably of utmost priority, and I think the most difficult nut to crack. And I think, especially focusing on children and the possibilities to be as close to being empowered concerning repair, concerning reuse, being as close to the activity as possible, I think is extremely powerful. So this idea of, going to repair cafes. There's different campaigns for children, for example, in Europe, to repair toys, for example, with their parents, all these kinds of things. I think really in the schools, etc., where not my generation, I wasn't taught anything to do with repair at school, but certainly, at least in my parents' generation or theirs, it was always being taught in terms of reusing, repairing, being thrifty, and now that kind of has to come back somehow. It's very difficult, but behavioral change is such a key one.
Great, thanks, Michael. Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the speakers. Behavioral change is a tough nut to crack, but I mean, you have to it's about having the right incentives. So for a program like ours, we're looking at having like good locations, convenient locations that are easy to get to. We're also looking at economic incentives. So when the cost of buying something is so high versus say borrowing something or sharing something, repairing something. That is a huge factor, and then the community aspect, which I haven't really touched on here, but that's central to our, our business model and our success, is that people actually enjoy coming out to these swapping events. It's actually fun to go and swap things, and there's a much more interesting story around it, a much more interesting story about sharing tools, because it's a relatively new phenomenon. And when people are talking about it and it's interesting and fun, then then people will participate. They'll want to participate. They'll want to share the stories as opposed to saying, "Well, I just went to the mall and I bought this," or I shopped online and I saved a few bucks. Like you're saving a lot of money potentially, and it's also far more interesting to do it this way and this time.
Ryan, Michael, Sheila, Tony, thank you so much for shedding light on repair and reuse. Thank you very much.